To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. It's the dawn of the 17th century, and you're standing at the top of a hill. A brisk wind rolls across your neck. In fact, it feels like winters have been getting longer and longer for the past few years. You don't know it, but you're living in the Little Ice Age, a climate change event that started in the 1300s but would only come to a peak in the Northern Hemisphere in the late 16th century. During the Little Ice Age, average temperatures dropped by 2 degrees Celsius or almost 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that might not seem like much, but it's had some big effects for you. Suddenly, it's a lot harder to grow crops, and people are starting to get hungry and angry. Tensions keep rising, and you find yourself asking, why? Why is this happening? And that is a question we can only begin to answer in hindsight. I'm Rob Fuller, and this is Study Hall Modern World History. A lot of history has to do with what people choose to do or not do. But sometimes things go wrong far beyond our choices. The Little Ice Age was a seemingly unavoidable period, and its effects collided with other global issues in a particularly turbulent period of world history. Let's start with why the Little Ice Age happened in the first place. And to do that, we're going to have to pivot from world history to science. Does this mean I get a lab coat? Whoa, cool. Without the scientific knowledge we have today, many people at the time blamed all sorts of things for the long-lasting cold. Some even thought it was punishment from the gods, who could get cranky at times. But today's climatologists have ideas that are a little easier to peer review. Some believe that this cooling in parts of the Northern Hemisphere may have been caused by decreased sunspot activity, or the fluctuations of the sun's magnetic field that make some spots of its surface appear darker. And fewer sunspots means less energy reaching Earth's surface. And increased volcanic activity probably made the situation worse by blasting dust up into the atmosphere. A lot of the energy the sun was putting out wound up hitting these dust particles and being reflected back out into space without ever reaching and warming the Earth. We can see the impact on temperature in this period from ice cores, tree rings, glacial sediment, and other historical meteorological records. While a few degrees difference may not sound like much, that kind of change usually occurs over thousands of years, not hundreds. And it was enough to turn the weather extreme. Severe storms, heavy rainfall, prolonged droughts, and harsh freezes took over the Northern Hemisphere. And if you're wondering what was going on in the Southern Hemisphere, well, they did experience some effects from the cold spell up north, like a wetter, rainier season, but not to the same extent as the Little Ice Age up in the north. Okay, back to history. Oh man, I don't get to keep the coat? Unfortunately though, erratic weather was far from the only problem empires were facing at this time. By the 17th century, various empires across the Northern Hemisphere were dealing with major political, social, and economic issues. Throw in a seemingly never-ending period of cold weather and things don't look so hot. Now, it's worth noting that historians are still engaging in heated debates about the 17th century and how much its various collapses and chaotic happenings were connected to each other. There are a lot of different ways to interpret this period, and looking at it through the lens of climate is just one of them. From the climate perspective, the Little Ice Age had major effects on lots of different areas of life, but most notably agriculture. Crops need stable weather conditions in order to thrive, so when unexpected cold, rain, and droughts come, they have a total meltdown. These sudden weather changes shrank or destroyed crop yields in many regions, which led to widespread shortages of food known as famines. Leading into the 17th century, empires sometimes depended on just one staple crop to feed their subjects and keep their entire economy running. So when that one crop failed, it could impact a country's entire food supply. As a result, the price of food skyrocketed, which meant that a lot of people went hungry. Crop failures and high food prices led to widespread starvation, which became the norm during the Little Ice Age, and malnutrition also meant that people got sick more easily, and infectious diseases spread rapidly during the famines. For example, in Italy, crop failures from flooding opened the door for starvation and disease. By 1656, the population of Naples dropped from 300,000 down to 150,000 in a matter of months, due to a resurgence of bubonic plague. One thing that did help soften the blow of these problems was the exchange of new crops between Eurasia and the Americas. While the change in climate did affect parts of North America, hardy crops like corn and potatoes were much more resilient in cold, dry weather. We'll talk more about the exchange of plants through international trade in our episode on the Columbian Exchange. However, in order to cultivate these crops, some governments took hold of the common land where non-land-owning farmers did their planting in order to expand commercial production. So if you were a peasant who managed to survive the starvation and diseases of the Little Ice Age, now you probably had to pack up and move to a city to find more stable work. This migration then led to overcrowding, a rising unhoused population, and more rapid spread of deadly diseases. And as people suffered, they became angry with their rulers, who had failed to improve conditions for their citizens who were now poor, sick, and suffering. This led to revolts, civil uprisings, and wars. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, more wars took place on Earth than any other period up to that point. It wasn't like the world was a super peaceful place before that period, but adding starvation and famine into the mix didn't help at all. Take Ming China. Around the 16th century, China adopted new tax policies which required payment in silver, which caused unrest among peasant farmers who didn't exactly have extra silver lying around. And despite the high taxes, that money was used up thanks to long-term conflict with Japan, among other things. As a result, the government increased taxes on peasants even more. Then, in the 1640s, after decades of bitter cold and weak monsoon seasons followed by severe droughts, economic and political unrest turned from bad to worse. Farmers had no crops to work, people were starving, and they were still being overtaxed. So to provide for themselves, many abandoned their homes, becoming rebels or joining peasant revolts, and rising up against the dynasty's rule. This crisis was the perfect opportunity for the Manchu people of northeastern China to stage a rebellion, recruit disgruntled subjects, and overthrow the Ming dynasty. Some former Ming officials even joined the rebels and positioned themselves at the head of the turmoil, angling to secure themselves roles at the top of the new dynasty. So in the case of Ming China, existing economic and political strife was made worse by the Little Ice Age, eventually leading to all-out war and the collapse of a major empire. And things weren't much better in Europe. Ever since Spain discovered silver deposits in Bolivia in 1545, European nations had been spending a lot on their militaries, mostly because now silver-rich Spain was spending a lot of its money on expanding its empire. And conflicts were breaking out left and right as a result. In the mid to late 16th century, the wars of religion occurred in France between Protestants and Catholics, with the Spanish helping to fund the Catholic side. The Great Rebellion in England ravaged the country throughout the 1640s, and the 30 Years' War began in 1618 between the Catholic Holy Roman Empire and the Protestants, which included anti-Catholic nations like Sweden and the Netherlands. It lasted, 30 years. By the end of the 17th century, people were more used to living with war than without it. Governments spent more money on weapons, which meant even higher taxes. And during the Little Ice Age, political and religious conflicts that were already growing were pushed to their breaking point. But some empires didn't descend into total chaos during the climate catastrophes. They took action to prevent what had occurred in Europe and China. Like when drought struck the Mughal Empire in India in 1630, the Emperor Shah Jahan at least made an effort to avoid shoving the burden onto his poorest citizens. He used his resources to establish food kitchens and stopped collecting land revenue taxes. However, in practice, much of this food was diverted to feed soldiers, and the food kitchens did little to relieve the pressures of famine. And oh yeah, he was in the midst of commissioning and constructing the Taj Mahal, so his priorities might have been elsewhere. Japanese rulers also tried to be strategic during the worst years of this time period. To reduce the burden on Japanese subjects, the government dramatically lowered taxes. They also distributed surplus grain that had been stored up from previous years in case of emergency. By using their resources to help their citizens, the Japanese government was able to protect their people from famine and bring relative peace to Japan from the 17th century well into the 19th century. at least compared to the near constant violence between rival warlords that had plagued previous centuries. But for some folks not lucky enough to be sustained by surplus rice set aside for a rainy day, there was always the option of picking up and moving. To escape war, religious strife, and now climate-related issues like famine and drought, people from less fortunate empires across the Northern Hemisphere moved to new parts of the world in hopes of finding a better life. This is known as climate migration, which is when climate stressors like changing rainfall, heavy flooding, or sea level rise pressure people to leave their homes behind. The Spanish and Portuguese started colonizing the Americas in the 15th century, and the English, French, and Dutch followed suit in the 17th century. The colonies had a growing trade economy with strong iron, logging, and fur industries, which provided employment opportunities for thousands of European colonists. During the second half of the 17th century, the population of the English colonies in North America quadrupled from around 50,000 to 200,000. Since cold weather was the new norm, French, English, and Dutch merchants used the demand for warmer clothes as an opportunity to expand the fur trade business. But many of the decisions that were good for some people came at the cost of others. In the Americas, the expansion of the fur trade meant that indigenous peoples were now in direct contact with people from other continents, which spread deadly diseases from Europeans to indigenous peoples. Competition for lucrative trade alliances with the French and English led to constant warfare between the Iroquois and Huron peoples, which further devastated their populations. And since they needed cheap labor, the Europeans captured and enslaved millions of Africans and forced them to migrate to the American colonies, the effects of which would ripple for centuries. The Little Ice Age exposed the flaws in empires all over the Northern Hemisphere. And while some empires ignored the issues and faced the consequences, others took positive action at the right moment and reduced the negative impacts of climate change for their subjects, keeping them peaceful and well-fed. And while we still can't prevent volcanic eruptions or affect sunspots, we can learn from past climate disasters like the Little Ice Age. With another climate crisis on our hands today, we have the power to choose what we will do in the face of it. If you're enjoying Study Hall Modern World History and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, go to gostudyhall.com or click on this button to learn more. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.